I'm going to start with a koan this morning. I'm sure I've spoken on this koan before, as those of you who've been around for a while have probably noticed. I have some favorite koans that I come back to often. And this is one of them. It's from the Book of Serenity, Yunyan's Great Compassion. Yunyan asked Wohl, what does the Bodhisattva of great compassion do with so many hands and eyes? Wohl said, it's like someone reaching back for the pillow at night. Yunyan said, I understand. Wohl said, how do you understand? Yunyan said, all over the body is hands and eyes. Wohl said, you said a lot there, but you only got 80%. Yunyan said, what about you, elder brother? Wohl said, throughout the body is hands and eyes. A beautiful, beautiful koan about compassion, and we'll come back to that. So as I throw things on the floor, so interesting. We're at a very kind of auspicious time, if you will, in the sense that, so it was mentioned earlier, this is the time of Easter, it is the time of Passover, it is the time of Ramadan, it is the time of spring, it is the time of the literal rebirth of the natural world kind of thing, new life showing up everywhere. It is considered to be a time of hope. So I'm going to come to that. I want to talk about that, about the whole idea of rebirth and hope. It's interesting. When I first came to Maine, I was on a contract working at what was first AmHigh and then was Riverview for about 6 years, State Psychiatric Hospital, for those of you who are not in Maine. And there was a guy who was a patient there at that time, a forensic patient. He had murdered somebody and been found guilty, not guilty by reason of insanity or not criminally responsible. I forget the exact decision that the court had made. But anyway, so he was there when I got there in 1999. And I was there for 6 years. And then I've been going back periodically since, because I'm the Buddhist chaplain for the hospital. And the current head chaplain, he's just a wonderful guy. So I hadn't heard anything from him in a couple of years. And then all of a sudden this week I got a call and he said, would you still be willing to work with some of our patients? And I guess they've been completely sort of shut down through COVID. And he said, but will you be willing to see some patients on Zoom? And I said, sure. And so I got on the Zoom the first day, and the name of the person that I'm talking to pops up. And I'm stunned, because it's this guy that was there in 1999, and he's still there. He's still in the hospital. And as I said, he had killed somebody at one time, and maybe more than one person. There's kind of some question about that. And he is a true psychopath. And in that sense, he's very dangerous. He grooms people, women particularly, it becomes controlling and all sorts of things. So I was stunned when I saw him there on the screen as a patient that was expressing his interest in Buddhism. But what it turned out was that he's now 78 years old. He's not a young man at all. And in dealing with his own mortality, has caught on to the idea of rebirth in Buddhism. And his life certainly has been horrible, being confined to a psychiatric hospital for over 20 years. And God only knows what it was before that. And he's living, I don't think he has, as a true psychopath, I don't think he has a conscience. I don't think there's anything that bothers him about what he may or what he did do. But he certainly has lived this life of being confined, being controlled, and so on. He's a hard individual to find compassion for, being completely honest. And yet he's like so many psychopaths, he's also very bright and very charming. So it's kind of this interesting juxtaposition. And he had actually gotten out of the hospital not too long ago. He had gone into a group home, I guess. And then, as I understand it, he called one of the female staff at home and indicated he wanted to have sex with her. So they immediately zapped him back into the hospital. I don't know. Anyway, but very interesting. So he's got this idea of rebirth, that he's going to get a whole, fresh, clean start, a whole new life. Which is not something, it's something certainly traditional in Buddhism, particularly Theravadan Buddhism, although also in Tibetan Buddhism. But in Zen, it's not something we talk about very much, probably because in Zen, we don't see there being any thing that lives on. We talk about being not born and not dying, that there is no solid, unchanging self. There is no soul. There is no it to carry on beyond this life. So I found the whole thing very, very, very interesting. And yet there are, that's the other thing, because Zen is non-theistic, it allows people who are Zen practitioners to encompass other sets of beliefs and so on. So as some of you know, we have a whole Catholic side to our lineage, that a prominent Zen Buddhist teacher, Father Bob Kennedy, is also a Catholic priest, and he gave rise to a whole lineage of priests and sisters in the church. And now I'm sure that they may very well share different views on this whole question of rebirth and death. And Zen allows for that. We have no dogma. We have no set of beliefs that we have to follow. What we're doing is encouraging us all to experience for ourselves, experience realization for ourselves, find the answers for ourselves, rather than reading them in a book or having clergy recite them for us. I'm going to wander around here a little bit, but hopefully I'll get back where I started. So did any of you attend the retreat, the treetop retreat, yesterday or Friday? Melissa did. Good. Yeah, so I was there yesterday morning. I was only there for the morning, but it was for me a wonderful opportunity because I got to talk with the other teachers. I had a chance to talk with Peter and Jim and Todd aside from the retreat. And it was a very good opportunity. We got into this whole question of compassion, which is something that I've been raising here frequently. And now, you see, I found my way back to the koan. Because this is the koan, right? The koan is about compassion. And the question here is, Yunyan says, when he's asked about how he understands this teaching of reaching back for the pillow in the night, he said, all over the body is hands and eyes. All over the body is hands and eyes. And Dawu says, you said a lot there, but you got only 80%. So Yunyan says, what about you, elder brother? And he says, throughout the body is hands and eyes. This is a very important distinction, as I've come to realize from my discussion with my offspring, my Dharma brothers yesterday. Because it goes to this whole question of, can we be truly compassionate without having experienced Kensho? And I've been taking the position in recent weeks that, yes, which is not to say that Kensho isn't valuable. The Kensho doesn't change many things, but at the same time, we can be deeply compassionate. We need to be deeply compassionate, whether or not we've experienced Kensho. And a couple of them came from a different place, or a somewhat different place of, no, Kensho really affects the depth of one's compassion. And I really think that it speaks in many ways to, again, this distinction between in the koan, between all over the body and all through the body. You know, so what is to start with, what is compassion? And as I see it, compassion is the spontaneous arising of caring for another being. Now that's very important, spontaneous arising. I chose those words fairly carefully. Because compassion is not an intellectual position from my perspective. Compassion is not, figuring out whom I'm going to help, figuring out how I'm going to help them. It is a fairly natural arising. Lots of examples of the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. If we see a child about to be hit by a car, our response is not going to be intellectual. We're not going to figure it out. We're not going to say, oh, does this child deserve to be saved or not deserve to be saved? We're going to just go. We're going to run. We're going to pull that child out of harm's way. And to me, that's the activity of compassion. It does not pass through the filter of the ego. It's not, oh my God, if I save this child, I'm going to be a hero. Everybody's going to think I'm a wonderful guy. It's not, oh my God, I don't know, car might hit me. I might get hurt if I do this, so I better not run out there. It's just, the urgency is in front of us and we respond. We respond from a place that is not our ego. And to me, that is compassion. That is the working of the natural working of compassion. And I think that's when the koan is talking about the pillow in the middle of the night, right? Say the exact phrase. It says, it is like someone reaching back for the pillow in the night. I presume we've all had that experience. You kind of, you don't think about it, you don't analyze it, you don't, the pillows are there and you pull it here, just do it. Just do it. Coming from some place within our being that's not our intellect, that's not our ego. It's just reacting. So this to me is the description of compassion. Coming from the place that is perhaps beyond our ego. So the position that a couple of the other teachers took was that Kensho deepens that Kensho is necessary to have real deep compassion. And I kind of, at the time, I kind of thought, yeah, well, maybe they're right. And maybe I've missed something. And maybe I'm kind of, to some extent, I'm deliberately underplaying Kensho because in this Sangha, there's some attachment to Kensho, and I'm trying to beat that out of you. And unfortunately, I haven't got the right stick or something. It's still creeping around. But that said, can we have compassion without Kensho? Well, can we grab our pillow in the middle of the night without Kensho? Right? Can we run and save the child that's about to be hit by the car without Kensho? If we encounter a homeless person on the street, can we show them some act of kindness without Kensho? My answer would be absolutely yes. Can we be, we talk about being selfless. Can we be selfless without Kensho? And I'm not talking about sort of selfless with a capital S, sort of Buddhist selflessness, but talking about just a selfless act, an act that's not conditioned by our ego, by our needs, wants, desires, etc., etc. And my answer to that is that I believe that we can. I believe that we can. Not only that, as I've said in the last few weeks, I believe that we need to. Kensho has a mind of its own. You can't hurry it. Todd repeated that quote. I think it's a Nanchuan koan. If you speaking with Chow Chow, if you seek after it, you go further from it. You cannot seek it. You cannot chase it. It's one of those paradoxes. Okay, the only way that we can really experience Kensho is to have no desire to experience Kensho. Kind of interesting. Different from the Rinzai position, by the way. They pursue it very arduously. But in Soto, we don't pursue it. We let it go. We forget about it. And we act and we live. And we assume that Kensho will take care of itself, which it does. So we have this, I believe we have this natural capacity to act in compassionate ways regardless of where we are on this path. And yes, does it get deeper over time? Perhaps. Do we get less self-absorbed over time? Perhaps. Are we freer from the constraints of our ego over time? Perhaps. But it does not preclude our acting compassionately right now. And one thing we all agreed on yesterday was the world needs us to act compassionately right now. I mean, it always does, but there are so many urgent situations right now that we can't defer our engagement. We can't defer our action. We can say, okay, well, when I get enlightened, when I have Kensho and whatever, blah, 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 I'm going to go and do good things. No, we have to act right now. The pillow falls out from under our head. We got to pull it back in. You know, that image of Avalokiteshvara, you may know Avalokiteshvara is the bodhisattva of compassion. But in India, the bodhisattva of compassion was male, was Avalokiteshvara. And he is depicted as having, they talk about many hands. And at the center of the palm of each hand is an eye. Right? And you've probably seen that many-armed deity, many-armed bodhisattva with the eye in the center of each palm. Because those eyes, why so many hands and eyes? Because there's so much suffering in the world. And Avalokiteshvara is attuned to all of the suffering in the world. Those eyes don't close. And to the extent that we're following the bodhisattva path, then we are called upon to be awake in the same way, to be paying attention, and to be opening our hearts to compassion. Everywhere and at all times. That's our practice. Peter Harris brought up the question, the situation of the Tibetan nuns that many of you are familiar with, who were raped and tortured and treated horribly in the Chinese prison camps, that when they were imprisoned by the Chinese. And as they left, thanked their Chinese captors for the opportunity that they had to practice. Now that's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. You know, to have compassion for the Chinese guards that treated them so horribly. And Peter was using that as an example of that being the kind of deep compassion that can only arise out of that non-egoic state, that state of Kensho. And I wouldn't argue with that. So that, but that's, I think for all of us, the rest of us, that's aspirational. That's what we can work towards, not in this lifetime, perhaps. If there are more lifetimes, may take a few thousand or before we can have that level of compassion, that, you know, but we need to work in that direction right now. You know, We need to try to have compassion for Putin. How do we have compassion for Putin? And for the Russian soldiers who murdered all those civilians. What was the town? Bucha. You know, how do we have compassion for them? It's easy to have compassion for the innocents. It's much harder to have compassion for those that are guilty of atrocities. So my patient shows up this week. And there was the challenge for me. It wasn't my patient, but the person I was chaplain. I don't know what the verb of chaplainizing was. And in that moment, it flashed before me. Somehow I have to have compassion for this man. Now, there are many who would disagree with me, and many of the staff at the hospital had great contempt for him and would have refused to do that. And if I got to tell you, that was my first thought was, I'm not doing this. I can't do this. And then I realized when I've shown up, I'm saying I'm a Buddhist chaplain. I have an obligation. I just can't walk away from this man, in spite of who he is and what he's done. And I thought of the story of the Buddha's story of Angulimala. Does everybody know that story? Not everybody. Okay, I'll just tell it briefly. This is one of the Jataka tales from the time of the Buddha. And there was a young man who was an apprentice to an older man. They were very close. They really loved each other. And somebody who was jealous of this told this older man that the young man had been sleeping with his wife. And the older man became furious and threw the young man out, disrupted his entire life. And sort of making the long story short, so this young fellow, he went off and I'm not going to leave out a lot of details, but anyway, he went off and he decided that he was going to make a mala out of human fingers, and that he went about robbing and killing people. And after he had robbed and killed them, he cut off their fingers and strung them around his neck, making a mala. And the longer that he did this, the more sort of hideous a being that he had become, to where he was unrecognizable as a human being, really, in many ways. So one day he sees a monk walking along and he thinks, well, I'm going to rob and kill this monk. And he starts after them. And even though the monk is just walking along slowly, Angulimala can't catch up to him. He starts running, chasing the guy faster and faster. He still can't catch up. This monk is just sort of somehow walking along slowly, and Angulimala can't reach him. So at that point, he realizes that this is not no ordinary monk, and that this is something quite special. And again, this was, of course, making a long story short, this was Shakyamuni Buddha. And so Angulimala asked the Buddha to take him in to the Sangha and allow him to be a student. And the Buddha does. And Angulimala completely transforms. And sometime later, soldiers who are seeking Angulimala, they've been searching for him all over the countryside. They come to the Buddha's encampment, and they come to the Buddha and they say, you know, do you have someone here? We're looking for this man Angulimala. Is he here? And the Buddha says, no, we have no such person here. Which I understand to be that personage of Angulimala, that gruesome murderer, no longer existed. That the person who was in the Buddha's encampment was truly a monk, truly an open-hearted individual, and that the traces of that horrible past were erased. So that story sort of flashed through my head as I looked at the screen and I saw this guy there. And I said, you know, I don't have the right to judge him. If he's asking to be taught, I don't have the right to refuse to teach him. Even if his reasons may be wrong. You know, he's sort of seeking personal salvation rather than coming from the perspective of the Bodhisattva vow. I don't think that's up to me to judge either. I think we have an obligation to be as compassionate as we can be at any time. Maybe I will stop there and see what thoughts or questions you have.
So, do you want to go?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So, in terms of not having Kensho and
You're
okay.
fine.
So in terms of not having Kensho and being compassionate, what keeps coming up for me is that this is kind of weird, but that the human calling for compassion may be more challenging if you don't have Kensho. Again, I'm not an expert on Kensho, clearly, but not having Kensho and being compassionate, to my mind, is the holy calling of being a human being. So when you're still in the state of being yourself and you have the exercise and opportunity of compassion, this is kind of a strange way of looking at it, but it just keeps coming up for me. It may be the fact that it's more challenging is more of the stretch of our human existence. Certainly for me, it feels like it's a beckoning maybe towards Kensho. Again, I'm speaking loosely because but that it's very important. So perhaps when you're in a state where your ego is gone and you're completely beyond your own self, perhaps the compassion is a different thing. But for me, a human being compassionate is the most beautiful thing. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is in terms of compassion for this psychopath and compassion for Putin, that's going to be a very fine distinction because yes, having compassion, psychopath worries me because I don't even, we understand that they're neurologically different. Their anatomy is different. So part of me feels like, well, that's a whole nother kind of question about it. But then again, who are we to judge and who are we to make distinctions and decide that we know because we can trace anatomy? But so the question is compassion, but also a skillful wisdom and means to know, just as you know with this guy, that they can be so incredibly dangerous. So you can't let him go and call some lady and seduce her and kill her. But on the other hand, you can have compassion with Putin also. Compassion, but you know, the Buddha was skillful to know that this guy wasn't going to go out and cut people's fingers off anymore, or cut the fingers after he kills them, because it's more to the point. So anyway, so that's where I'm coming from, but I think we're on this earth. We're, you know, in general, we're on a path, including that we are humans, not that we are transcendent beings, but we're humans. And there's a meaning to being a human struggling and having compassion, is from my perspective.
That's part of where part of my difficulty with this comes from, because I agree with you 100%. We are human. We will never not be human. We'll be dead, but we won't be, you know, but while we're alive, while we are alive, we will always be human. We can't escape that. And you know, so I think we're talking always in sort of very relative terms. You know, are there people whose realization is so pure and so deep that they have transcended their humanity? I don't believe that. Are they much freer from the flaws of humanity than most of the rest of us? Yes. You know, is Peter going to have much more self-centered, selfish thoughts than the Dalai Lama? Yes. You know, absolutely. You know, could Peter do what those nuns, those Tibetan nuns did in China? I very much doubt it. Right? So this is something that's always relative. And again, you know, so now I'm kind of like flipping back and I'm saying, you know, I'm just not sure how much Kensho matters in this whole equation, you know. And some of us are inherently more sort of self-centered and selfish. And, you know, maybe psychopaths being the ultimate of that. You know, Putin is a psychopath. You know, there's no question. He can have thousands and thousands of deaths on his hand and not lose a night's sleep. You know, the only reason he's losing sleep is because he fears that somebody might try to poison him. You know, he doesn't have a shred of compassion. Doesn't have, you know, that's sort of in a way the definition of psychopathy. So we're probably all somewheres on a continuum between Putin and the Dalai Lama, right? We'd like to hope we're closer to the Dalai Lama than Putin, but that can change moment to moment. Right? And that's our work. That's our work, because we want to be more open and we want to be more compassionate and we want to lessen the extent to which our ego controls our actions, thoughts and actions.
Well, the idea of Kensho and compassion is interesting, because I think compassion deepens as you move along this path, or I don't know if you move along, as you're on this path. And also it can be cultivated. I mean, yes, it's spontaneous at some level, but I have, worked on cultivating, and probably all of us have, compassion towards things and beings that are difficult in life, and may be a source of problem, suffering, however you want to say it. So this idea of cultivating compassion has always been important to me, and deepening it. And the flip side of that, that goes along with it, is kind of that Christian idea of forgiveness. Now, we don't seem to talk about forgiveness much in Buddhism, but I have found it very powerful in my life, the act of forgiving. And now this is the selfish part, is I get something out of that. I feel better when I forgive and find compassion for things or people that I'm having problems with, or that are maybe not as sympathetic as I'd like. I don't know why. It's like some form of just release or letting go, if you can let go, but if there is such a thing as letting go. But this, and I guess that's appropriate for Easter, this idea of forgiveness and compassion, and how they kind of intertwine.
There were two things that you said that resonated with me that I now have flown out of my mind, and I need a moment. Well, one of the things I want to talk about, one of the things that we also talked about amongst the teachers yesterday was this whole sudden versus gradual enlightenment question. And I think that relates to your first point about that, as your sense that as you're practicing, you're more free to be compassionate, as part of that. And that it works in concert with the idea of the gradual enlightenment, which I support, I hold to, which is that, just that as you're practicing, regardless of whether or not you have Kensho, your ego is kind of losing its prominence. It's losing its hold on your consciousness. It's allowing you to be freer and more spontaneous, and hence more compassionate in your responses. And perhaps at the end of the day, all roads lead to Rome. That the person who had some kind of fantastic, phantasmagorical Kensho experience, and the person who just kind of trod the road of practice end up at the same place. I think they do.
Well, Peter, what is your take on the Buddhist approach to forgiveness, if that is a concept, or is that just, like I said, just part of compassion?
Well, it's a good question. I think that the Buddhist take would be there's nothing to forgive.
Hmm.
There's no one who's injured, and there's therefore no injury, you know, and therefore nothing to forgive. You know, I mean, and I think that's the, you know, again, I think back to those nuns. They're not forgiving. They just have no, they have no concept that there's something to forgive.
Yeah.
You know, they had an opportunity to practice. I think they meant that sincerely. It's a radical idea, almost approaching what we would call crazy. But now, that said, does that mean, you know, and I don't mean that I think that forgiveness is a wonderful thing. I do think it's a wonderful thing. You know, I mean, part of my life experience is a decade of involvement with the 12 steps, where forgiveness is a very important aspect. And I think at a human level, at a psychological level, it's an enormously important practice. Not to carry around the baggage of resentments of it, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're well, I think we're always functioning in several realms at several levels, and I don't think that any of these has an exclusive grasp on the truth. I think that you know, there are many things that are not within the realm of Zen, that are not Buddhist practices, that are nevertheless wonderful, powerful spiritual practices.
Yeah.
Peter, can you help me with my understanding of Kensho? Does it mean awakening?
Yes, that's what it means. What does that mean? It means we would also say the term I like better is realization, realizing our true nature, our fundamental nature. And the best description of that is Dogen's description of body and mind falling away. That in the experience of Kensho, there is no mind and there is no body. What is there? Interesting question. I'm not going to answer that. You have to go find out for yourself. See, I got in this. This is just, I got myself in a mess. I'm trying to get everybody off of Kensho, and now we're like back in it with both feet. Oh my God. Shoot me. Todd said he would never mention Kensho in the Zendo. And here I am, like, go forget everything you've heard today. Nobody ever listened to this tape. And as they say in New Jersey, forget about it. So maybe I was going to say, maybe I should quit while I'm ahead, but I'm not ahead. Maybe I should quit before I get further behind. You know, all right, I'm going to make a fun. I mean, you know, in Rinzai Zen, this is what got me started yesterday, that Treetop has now a beautiful new little library of some books that were Steph's in the entranceway to the Zendo. And the book I pulled off was Hakuin Zenji. I just happened to pull off Hakuin and open it up. And there's Hakuin saying, if you haven't had Kensho, you can't even say that you're a Zen practitioner. Okay. So that's that Rinzai perspective. That's it. There is, you know, so we don't have the whole, we don't own the whole thing. The Rinzai perspective is that's it. And therefore, excuse me, if you were a Rinzai student, you would be hearing this all the time, every single time coming into the Zendo, telling you, you got to have it, you got to do it, you got to break through, you know. And that would be the main focus of the practice. And without getting too far into that, I mean, that can, in my view, can leads to a lot of sort of premature and immature sort of realization that really isn't producing the kind of change that we might hope having it. But I think the Rinzai, if I were a Rinzai teacher, I might be argue that that's okay. They get a glimpse, and that's going to give them the motivation to keep going. Unfortunately, I think sometimes they get a glimpse and they think, okay, I've got it now. I don't have to keep going. You know, I knew a guy who was like that once. He was all set because he had that premature experience and figured that was it. So I don't know. So is one approach right and the other wrong? I couldn't say that. I would just say that in Soto, that's not our approach. We don't emphasize Kensho. We don't emphasize the sudden enlightenment. If anything, we talk about the gradual enlightenment. Have I done anything to extricate myself from that? Am I still there?
How do Rinzai practitioners balance the Buddhist concept that the more you chase it, the further you are from achieving it?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. You know, if this were Rinzai Zendo, you would be encouraged to just throw yourself in, you know, and you know, give everything to that, and yeah, I honestly don't know how they would answer. It's a good question, Susan. I don't know how they would answer that question. Fortunately, I don't have to answer it. Okay. This is a good point to end up.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Live long and prosper. I can't like that. Have a good day. Those of you that celebrate Easter, have a happy Easter. Celebrate Passover. Have a good Passover. so on. Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.